Mayflies by Meana Starkey. For Holly. Chapter 1. Our planet is so beautiful, Sanji cooed as she snuggled closer to her husband, where they were seated comfortably against the soft white moss at the base of a saba tree. The forest was indeed beautiful. Spread before the couple was a seemingly endless expanse of green, kissed with touches of yellow, reaching out from fractals of brown. Soft light shone down from spaces in the treetops that highlighted choice plants from the diversely colored flora that surrounded them. The forest was expansive and ancient, the branches of the trees intertwining with each other, all equally fused like a haphazardly knitted sweater, full of knots, holes, and tightly woven yarn. Iridescent blue shone from the waterfalls behind. The roar of the water going over the falls behind them fell together with bird song, and the scurry of animals making an organic symphony, filling the woodland with a warm, peaceful energy. The fragrant scent of flowers bombarded the senses. The trees bulged with ripe fruit of every kind imaginable. One only had to barely extend an arm to pluck some berries, fruit, or nuts to eat. It was truly paradise. Berba let out a little grunt, then nodded in agreement, his eyes still closed, not quite willing to get up and start his day. He begrudgingly peeped open one eye to glance toward his wife, who was resting peacefully beside him. His eyes filled with love as his gaze rested upon her. Berba let out a long yawn, and as he did so, he slowly reached out his massive arms, and in one swift movement, engulfed Sanji in his embrace once more. Long gone were the days of war that had once engulfed their planet. Now what lay left behind from those chaotic few centuries, was a more organized and traditional sort of society. In order to try to prevent disputes, the elders had assigned every single omnif and every couple their own scepter of land to oversee, and for most intents and purposes own, each roughly equivalent in size. With ownership had come responsibility. It was sometimes arduous work to tend to the required plot of boba and saba trees. The trees with their wide pointy leaves not only produced beautiful succulent fruit, they also excreted a sap that was crucial for travel. But for Berba and Sanji, these tasks were not considered a burden, but instead gave them a great sense of satisfaction and joy. Their final wars, they called it, had caused a great deal of death and destruction before the offenders had been defeated and sent into exile. 10,000 years had since passed since that dreadful time in their history, and watching the planet slowly heal had brought a certain level of peace to Berba and all the other survivors, but not completely. They had lost many, and Berba's eyes teared up even now at the thought. Taking a deep breath, Berba's thoughts returned to Sanji. Sanji, beautiful Sanji. He now allowed himself a brief smile. Sanji, sensing his thoughts, turned to him to comfort him. They had almost everything that anyone could want, and truly, now was all that ever mattered. His mood suddenly shifted, and Berba's eyes lit up mischievously. He and Sanji had been together for a little over 10,000 years, but he still could not get enough of his woman. Berba stretched out again, this time arching his back a little, and as he did, he gently began stroking his hooves against his wife's. Sanji groaned in response, rolled to her side, and began arching her back, rubbing her back against coarse forests of fur-like skin that covered her husband's body. Berba pulled Sanji closer to him, and in a low, guttural, almost animalistic tone, whined into her ear his need for her. Smiling, Sanji abruptly pulled away and jumped to her feet. Well, her hooves. Taking a sexy pose at a safe distance away from her husband, she slowly ran a single clawed finger down the length of one of her horns. Well, she chuckled, you're going to have to earn it first, she shouted, laughing, and with an almost maniacal expression of pure joy on her face. Sanji left off into the forest on all fours with Berba close behind her. With a great deal of grunting and snorting, the two made a wide circle through the woods and ended up back at the falls. Berba leapt towards her and sank his long, angular teeth deep into the flesh of her back. Sanji squealed with delight, pushed her away forward from him, tearing a deep gash in her back. Sanji, now completely aroused, allowed Berba to have his way with her. Berba took her from behind hard, wrapping his arms around her to caress her taut breasts before digging his claws deeply into them. Sanji screeched in ecstasy, and the two of them rolled as one over and over down a sharply inclined ravine, where he then flipped her over to face him and finish. As they orgasmed simultaneously with a last grunt and a sigh, their bodies released a white, creamy fluid from every skin shoot on their bodies. Sanji gently stroked the pendant at her neck, a purple cross-shaped crystal. All of her wounds healed instantly. Berba did the same with his. Tell me, how is it possible every time with you is somehow better than any time before, but also as if it were our first time together? Sanji asked. Berba smiled and shrugged his shoulders, his eyes shimmering with love. They both watched as their love elixir they had excreted from their bodies began to sprout flowers and other greenery on the ground wherever it touched. This feat had never ceased to amaze them, as it seemed to cement the action and realness of their love. The excretions from their kind could be used for many purposes, depending on the emotion behind it. He shuddered at the memory of incidents in the past where there had been those set on destruction, ultimate power, and control. Thankfully, though, that was all in the past. Berba thought with a relieved sigh. Those few had eventually been rounded up, their stones taken from them, and sent off to live out their lives elsewhere, far from anyone or anything that they could ever possibly cause further harm to themselves or each other. But there had been one lasting repercussion from the actions of those in the past. No one of his kind had been able to reproduce offspring since. All of a sudden, a loud crash sounded above their heads. They both looked up to see their friend Seraph, who clearly wanted to make his presence known with a very loud, slightly annoying series of high-pitched screeches and a pounce that shook the tree above them. Seraph peered down at them with a knowing smile, pointedly taking in the view of all the new flowers and small shrubbery that surrounded Sanji and Berba. "What have you two been up to?" he asked coyly. Berba grabbed a thick tree branch and whipped it towards Seraph, narrowly missing his head. "Why, I guess, if you ever grow up, you might get to find out," Berba said with a chuckle. At that, looking mock offended, Seraph leapt from the branch onto Berba, and they began to viciously tear into each other, leaving Sanji to stand by, amused by their antics. Suddenly a high-pitched sound pierced the air. They were being summoned to the gathering place. With a disappointed grunt, the two broke up their fun, and the three of them proceeded to the headquarters. The sacred meeting place was a small clearing outside the woodlands, covered with flat and cylindrical-shaped stones and crystals ranging in size. Their leader, Kibia, was a taller, gaunt version of them that was the oldest of their kind. She had earned her position not just through age, but had also proven herself as a great leader during the war. She wore a dark purple sash and a piece of a hush vine over her heart that had been passed down from leader to leader since the time of the ancients. Everyone stood respectfully as she approached the speaking stone and waited for her to speak. Kibia took a moment to take in all of their faces before she began. Her heart was heavy, and she knew what she was about to ask might have grave consequences, but she felt that she must. She held out a hand towards her lead scientist and in a low, gentle tone asked him to join her where she stood. He also happened to be her mate. He approached her and stood silently by her side, but he offered her his hand in return to show his support. She took it gratefully and began. "My people, I've called you all here to share some disheartening news. We have lived together now for over 10,000 cycles in peace, and I feel this has nurtured great joy and healing among us. However, as you know, there is one problem that we have yet to conquer. That is the issue of procreation. Our planet is large, and there is plenty of room for many more people. I look out at all of you today and see many couples here that have had this deep longing in your heart to create a family. At this, Sanji and Berba exchanged a look of longing between them. This was a subject they tried to avoid bringing up. Our numbers, as you know, will not easily dwindle, Leader Kibia said as she thoughtfully cradled the crystal that lay against her collarbone between her fingers. She continued, Vernby has tirelessly conducted experiments with the plants and minerals that we have here on our planet, but he has been unable to find a cure. Kibia bowed her head and released a small sigh. At this point, Vernby cleared his throat and spoke. It is with a sad heart that we have brought you all together today, to see if any of you would be willing to leave our beloved planet in search of mineral and plant specimens from other planets to bring back in order to possibly create a cure. So we put this question before you. Do we carry on as we are, or are there any among you willing to go on such a mission? The entire group stood in stunned silence for a moment, each contemplating what their answer should be. One person in the crowd finally spoke up. We have paradise here. I personally can carry on without children. I fear that leaving would be too dangerous. We don't know what is out there. At hearing the word fear, Berba felt a sudden surge of disdain. What if we had let fear stop us in the past? He found himself saying out loud. He did not dare glance at Sanji as he stated this. Sanji, in response to his statement, took his hand, showing her support. How soon can everything be ready for my departure? Berba boldly asked. You don't think you're going anywhere without me, do you? Sanji asked. Hey, you guys aren't going anywhere without me either, Seraph stated firmly. It is decided then. The leader appraised each of them in turn with great appreciation and gratitude. Everyone else gathered around them, hugging, shaking hands. Many eyes glowed bright, full of hope and gratitude for their impending sacrifice. The well-wishing now being over, Berba knew one thing. There was no going back on their word. Their fate was sealed.